Now we're going to take a look at risk response planning. So what is risk response planning? It's the process of determining how to deal with known risks. So we are focusing here on known risks, and we will be identifying and assigning one person to each risk. So we have to estimate the resources required to handle the risk as well. Of course, every risk needs to have an accountable person to take care of it, but that's not the only person who will be required to handle the risk. Now, we have two specific techniques that we can use. One is the prevention strategy. The other one is the recovery strategy. Prevention strategy happens before the risk happens, before the risk is realized, before the risk turns into a problem or issue. And it deals with the causes of the risk. We focus on the causes of the risk. The recovery happens after the risk has realized, has happened, has turned into a problem or issue, and it deals with the effects, how we can recover from the risk itself. Now, in terms of known risks, we have controllable and non-controllable risks. In controllable risks, these are the risks that we can identify their causes. These are the risks that we can prevent them to some extent or completely from happening. But if it is a non-controllable risk, then we have to deal with its effects. We have to recover from it. So we require recovery strategies for it. Now, we do have other specific names of prevention and recovery, but we do have unknown risks as well. And in terms of unknown risks, obviously they're unknown. We don't know how to prevent them from happening or how to recover from them because we have no idea what those risks are. So in this case, we will be focusing on building reserves in the project, the contingencies and the management reserves in the project. So what are the prevention strategies? The prevention strategies are avoidance, mitigation, and transference. And the recovery strategy is acceptance and, of course, contingency planning as part of that. So what are risk response strategies? The risk response strategies for prevention and recovery are different. So for prevention strategies, we have avoidance, mitigation, and transference. In terms of avoidance, the focus will be to avoid the risk from happening altogether. So we'll be focusing on the cause of the risk and the removal of the cause of the risk. Mitigation focuses on reducing the impact or the probability of the risk happening. So we have risk A, it happens, there is no way we can avoid that risk. So what we're going to do is we focus on mitigating the impact, reducing the impact, or mitigating the probability of it happening. Then transference is when we transfer the risk to another entity. This happens when there is another entity which is more qualified than us to deal with the risk. And for them, that may be a lower impact, lower probability risk, or may not be a risk at all. So some examples of transference could be purchasing insurance, because insurance companies are in a better situation, a better case to deal with the risks, because they are pulling all the resources together to deal with the risks. Or we can outsource it. And in many cases, outsourcing, we'll be transferring the risk completely, and the outsourcer may not even see what is being outsourced to them as a risk because they are specialized to deal with those situations. Then we have the acceptance. And in terms of acceptance, we just accept the risk. And if that risk happens, then we'll be employing our contingency plans to deal with the risk after it has happened. One thing to keep in mind is that employing any of these strategies could result in other risks. So if I avoid the risk A in my project, I may be in a situation of introducing a new risk. While mitigating a risk, I will not be removing the risk. The risk will stay with my project. And that new risk, or that risk, that existing risk, now it's lower in probability or impact, is called a residual risk. So if anybody asks, what is a residual risk? Residual risk is a mitigated risk, is the original risk with a lower probability or impact. With transferring, we may have a secondary risk, because now what happens if the outsourcer goes out of business. That's a new risk to us. That's a secondary risk that will happen because of the transferring. So we need to be cognizant of all these residual and secondary risks that it could happen after we have employed one or multiple of these strategies. So we have to decide whether it's a good idea to avoid the risk or mitigate the risk or transfer the risk. Is it a good idea to introduce the secondary risk? And if the residual risk that we are introducing is actually worth the amount of time and effort that we are putting into the project to mitigate the risk. So let's do a quick exercise here. Now, we have a few scenarios here, and we want to know which strategy each one is. Changing the product design to preclude the issue. This will be an avoidance strategy because we're changing the design, and now the whole cost for the potential risk is going to go away. Wait and see what happens. This is an acceptance strategy. We just wait to see what happens. Hire a better qualified resource for your team. So there are different ways of looking at this. We could look at this as a mitigation. We could look at this as avoiding if we have somebody on the team or we don't have a qualified resource on the team. We could even look at it in some cases if this person is a consultant or an outsourcer, look at it as transferring the risk. Buy insurance, that is transference. Create a contingency plan, that is again acceptance. Now, let's see what sort of guidelines we can provide in terms of which strategy should be used. So in this diagram, we see probability versus impact. As probability goes up, we have to consider whether this is actually a risk. If the probability of something happening is 99% or even 100% or 95%, then we would be considering that as an assumption. And we will be planning as though this would happen actually. But if it is a lower impact, as probability comes down, we will be looking into accepting that, especially because it's a lower impact, accepting that passively. Accepting it passively means we will not be doing much about it. If it happens, then we will come up with a contingency plan and we will deal with that at that point. But as impact goes up, if the probability is low, we would try to see if we can transfer it. But if the probability is high, we would be accepting it actively, which means we have a contingency plan for it and management reserve in place. If the impact starts to grow, we would be looking into two strategies, mitigation and obviously avoiding. If the impact is going to be really high, we would be really looking into avoiding that particular risk.